Welcome everyone to this Donald P. Belisario College of Communications at Penn State digital video tutorial. This video is going to cover the basics of using Adobe Premiere to edit video. I think video storytelling can be fun, but it's also complicated. There's a lot to consider. You got to find a story, there's interviewing, recording, etc. But that's really only the start, and much of the magic happens in the editing, where you make decisions about what to include, the order of events, pacing, etc. At its core, I really do believe that Premiere is easier to use than it seems when you first open the program and see everything in front of you. And this video is designed to get you started with the editing process, and it's going to cover the basics. I hope it teaches you enough to get you rolling and give you a foundation from which you can grow through practicing and studying on your own. The video is going to break down into these broad areas. We're going to start by talking about how to set up your Premiere project before you even start to edit, and then how to import your assets, things like video, audio, still photos, that kind of thing. We'll cover the basic editing tools. I'm going to go over how to create titles and other kinds of text on screen. I'll do a little bit of looking at how to make basic corrections to audio and video. And then the last step will be how do you export your work so you have a finished video. This is obviously not a complete and exhaustive tutorial. It's really designed as a first step. Don't be shy if you're a student at Penn State about asking your teacher for help, and there's certainly many online resources that you can find by searching for them or using a service like lynda.com. This video is also a companion to a handout I've created, and I'll put a link to that handout in the video description. So let's get started. We'll start with the setting up of your project, and it's a super important, if a little bit tedious step, but if you do it right at the beginning, it will save you a lot of grief and pain in the long run. I know that there is a nearly overwhelming temptation to just dive in when you sit down to edit. You're excited, you've got all these video clips on your camera, maybe audio, still photos, and you want to look at them and listen to them, and you just want to start editing. All I can say is don't. Before you start editing, you need to make sure that all your files are organized. If you don't, Premiere may have trouble finding files, which will cause you headaches and a lot of wasted time, and perhaps even worse, some real pain and grief. In the real world, where you may be collaborating with other people, or you'll have a boss or a client, it's really important that they can find the work and edit without complaint. Premiere needs those original files, whatever it is you shot on your camera, whatever you recorded, in order to work. So you need to make sure that those files stay connected to the Premiere project and that everything is in its place. And so the easiest way to do that is to create a single master folder for every video project you work on, and then within that have subfolders to help you stay organized for the various pieces of the puzzle. So you want to build all that before you open Premiere, before you even start editing. And for a complicated project, you might even have folders within folders. So let's look at an example of a slightly complicated kind of project. So this is from a video I did a number of years ago on a student production of The Wizard of Oz. And you'll see that I've got these folders for the different kinds of media I created. So I shot video, obviously. I shot some still photos. I recorded some audio separately. This folder called Output is where I would put the finished video once I was done, and then I export it into a format that I could upload to YouTube or whatever. And so you can see I've got different versions of that in here. Because this project was involved and required multiple shoots, I made multiple subfolders. So inside my video folder, I broke it down sometimes by date. So on what date did I shoot things? And I always start with the year first so that things sort of sort in a natural way. But then important clips I then pulled out and put into individual folders. So if I wanted to keep track of my detail video clips, I might make a folder for that. So you can see how as a project grows more and more complicated and shot over various time frames, you might want to break down what you shot into multiple folders. And then you can even rename clips within that. So I want to remember that this is a clip of flowers so I can find it more easily later. I do all that renaming, I do all that organizing before I ever open Premiere. And I can do that, with all sorts of things. So with audio, I did interviews and I broke the interviews down, and then I renamed each interview by who I interviewed. So I'd be able to find it that much more easily when I actually started editing. Again, you want to do all of that. You want to create these folders, this master kind of folder strategy in advance before you open Premiere. Because if you rename files or you move folders around after you've started editing them, Premiere is going to lose track of them. So let me show you how this works for a much simpler project. So I would make a new folder. My convention is to start with the year. And if I'm a student, I'm going to use my name, so my teacher knows who it is. And then some kind of keyword for whatever it might be about. So in this case, it's a demo. And then inside of that, I'm going to make one folder and I'm going to call it video. And that's where I'm going to put the raw video that I've shot for the project. I'm going to make one called audio. In case I have audios, I'll make one called stills, and I'll make one called graphics. And then as I mentioned, I make one called output, and I usually put an underscore under it so that it sorts to the top, just so it's easy to find. So now I've got my folder set up, and I'm going to bring that raw material in. So let us pretend, for example's sake, that this is my camera, and I've looked through these files, and I've actually, in this case, renamed them already. But I want to grab all these videos. I had to have a lot more in a real situation, of course, because you want to make sure you shoot plenty. And then I've got, interviews. In this case, we're just going to use one that I've set up as an example. So at the moment, I've got one audio file. I've got a handful of video clips, nothing in the stills or graphics. I could delete those if I knew I wasn't going to have any, but whatever. At this point, I can open Premiere. Once Premiere is open, I'm going to click on New Project. And I'm just going to use the exact same naming convention to keep things simple in my head, which I think was your name, right? Demo, I think, is the same. What's important now are two steps. You need to save that into that same project. All right, so I'm going to go find that folder, and this is the one, and I'm going to hit choose. And I think just to be consistent, I'll put in that space. You don't want spaces, you don't want interesting characters, you want to avoid exclamation points, silly kinds of characters like that. Just dashes, underscores, text, and numbers. So I'm saving it into that same folder. The only other thing you want to check is that under scratch disks, it also says same as project. If for some reason this was saved like to the documents folder or somewhere else, you can save it anywhere, but you don't want to. You want to save all of this with your project. So again, it's in a single master folder that could be taken anywhere. At that point, you just hit OK. And this is what Premiere looks like before we've done anything to it. If you came back to your folder, you'd see that it's created. We've saved the project into there. We've got our original content. And as soon as we start adding content, you'll see that Premiere generates some of its own folders. There's an autosave folder and some other things that it needs to function, and they'll all be in that folder as well. So all of this is done before we even start to edit, but now we're ready to go. And what we've done, if we've done this correctly, is we've created a folder that we can transport with us anywhere we want. We can pass this off to an external hard drive, we can give it to a client, we can put it on a hard drive and mail it to someone, we can upload it to an online storage place. While you're working at it, you want it to either be on your computer or on an external hard drive, but you can then pass it off to someone else and they can just pick up from where you left off and continue to edit. If you don't do this properly, you're going to get to a place in your video where Premiere can't find a file, and it won't be able to continue editing. All right, so the next step, things get a little bit easier actually, is how do we import content? We've shot this video, we've recorded audio, we've done whatever. We want to bring it into Premiere. You'll notice the default look of Premiere. If you see at the very top, there's a series of tabs that change the layout of things, depending on what we're going to be working on. We're going to stick mostly to editing. You'll notice also if you play around that you can change things. If you want to make one window bigger or smaller, you actually can get, you can actually rearrange these windows. You can do all sorts of stuff. If you ever get to a place where you've messed around and you want to get back to where you started, a simple tip is to come up to Window, Workspace, Reset to save layout, and it'll reset the windows to this default layout. So if you ever mess things up and move a window around and don't know how to fix it, that's how we fix it. This window down here where it says import media to start is where we're going to bring in our content, and it's going to reside in there. Premiere uses the word import, but you need to understand that it's not copying files, it's not actually putting those files or folders in Premiere. It's really just linking to wherever they are on your computer. And if you move something around, you break that link, and that's why it's so important to set it all up first. These two windows on the top are going to be ways of looking at what we're doing or listening to what we're doing. And this window over here that's called the timeline is where we'll actually build our video. That's where we'll do the actual editing. So we start by importing, and multiple ways to do anything in Premiere. I won't be able to show you every way, and you may have your own ways that work better, but I'll just show you the way I do it. Most things can be connected to up here through the drop-down menus, but you'll notice next to a lot of things are these quick key menu shortcuts. So that little symbol on a Mac is the Command key. So Command O is how you open a project, Command S is how you save a project, etc. So to import, you can do File, Import, or you can just remember that it's Command I. And Command I is faster because you don't have to keep dragging up and down to the menu. So I've got my project here. I could import a single video clip. I could hold down the Shift key and get all of them, or you can bring in entire folders. And so I'm going to bring in this folder, and that way it stays organized inside of Premiere. And you'll see there it is. And then I'm going to import the audio. And that's really all I've got right now, right? And basically what I've got here is a tiny small section of that much larger project I showed at the beginning. So this is just one piece of that much larger video, which had multiple interviews and what we call B-roll visuals, that kind of thing. So at this point, I've imported my content, and now I want to start editing. Well, how do I know what I want to edit? I want to be able to look at these clips, right? And right now they're just text. So one thing you can do, and you can double click and open a folder, is if you come down here, you'll see there's a list view, the view we're in now, or you can do an icon view. So if you want to see what the clip is, and in fact, if you roll over it, you can kind of play through it. That's one way. If you can't remember what's on a clip, you can look at it this way. Or you can look at it by list view and go by the name. So if I wanted to use part of this clip, I can double click on it, and that's what this window is useful for. It's for looking at and playing through these buttons a piece of a clip, so I can decide whether I want to edit with it or not. And again, you can do this by clicking on the buttons.
So great when you can hear the audience laughing and
right, and we get to hear him talk. You can also use the space bar to stop
participating in the show itself
and start. And on almost every video editor in the known universe, the keys J, K, and L, which are all right next to each other, can be reverse, stop, and play in that order. So J will play it in reverse, K will stop it, and L will play it.
in the show itself.
And what's also interesting is if you double tap a key, it'll play it faster. So the L key, and then the L key again.
You kind of get in the zone where you kind of actually
So if you watch a video editor, you'll often see them with their fingers just sitting on the J, K, and L keys because they use them so often. Okay, so how do we actually start editing? The timeline window over here will let us create what are called sequences, and each sequence can be a set of clips of audio, video stills that we are going to edit, and you can have multiple sequences. Each sequence is in a sense its own movie, or you can end up combining those by copying and pasting into each other. So how do we create a sequence? You can come down here to New Item. You'll also find New Item up under File, and you can create what's called a new sequence. And at that point, you might be completely overwhelmed because you don't find your camera here, or you don't know exactly what your camera is, or you're not sure of the settings. If you knew you shot with a SLR or actually a mirrorless camera as well, and you knew that you would set it to 1080, which is the resolution, and you knew that it was 30 frames a second, you could just pick that. But you might get it wrong, right? So, and then there was a whole other list of cameras. The safest way to do this, and it's extremely important you do it first thing, is that you grab a piece of video. It can't be audio, it can't be still photos. It should be video off of your primary camera, if by some chance you shot with more than one camera. The video that you want or finished video to look like. And you drag that out onto the timeline. And notice that I can simply drag from this project window, and that will drag the whole clip. I can also come up here, I'm on this clip, I can drag from here, same idea, I get the whole clip. Or there are ways to just pick part of this clip, and I'll show you that in just a second. But let's say we wanted the whole clip, and for this first step it doesn't matter. We're just going to drag any clip out here. If you don't get an error message or a warning message, you're fine. Just keep going. It means the sequence is the same as the video. Perfect. Because that's where we want to end up. But if Premiere says, hey, wait a minute, the settings for this sequence don't match the settings for this video, you get this warning. This clip does not match the sequence settings. Do you want to change the sequence to match this clip settings? And the default is keep existing settings, and that's wrong. We want most of the time, there might be exceptions, but we want most of the time the video that we're editing to match the video that we've shot. We want it to be the same kind in the end. So we're going to click change. Okay? If by accident I click keep existing settings, you can see what happens. This is the video on the left, the whole video. But because the sequence was set for a different kind of video, it ends up cropped and it ends up even the wrong shape. It's more square looking. And that's a problem. And there are ways to fix it, but it's time consuming and sort of a pain in the neck. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to use Command Z and I'm going to undo. And I'm hoping I get that message again. So if I pick change, now they match and they should look the same. And that's where we want to go. Once you've done that, I can actually delete this off of here. And all I'm doing is clicking on it and hitting the delete key on my keyboard. And now this sequence is set. And now I can go back and edit in whatever order I want. You're not going to get that message again. The sequence settings won't change. So in general, when we're editing videos that were created with an interview and B-roll, that's a sort of standard kind of video, right? We go out and we interview someone about what they do. They tell us something wonderful, and then we shoot a lot of B-roll, what we call B-roll, the video of the action that shows them doing this thing. If that's the kind of video we're creating, we generally would edit the interview first. Because the interview is the story, that's going to be the arc, and so we want to edit that down into something manageable, and then we'll bring in our B-roll on top of that so we can watch them do what they're talking about. So in this case, this is my interview. Right? And so what I would do is I could either chop it up here, and so I can do that by playing a little bit and setting what are called in and out points. So this little bracket, you can see it says mark in, it's the letter I, and this says mark out, O. And so I could say, well, if I listened to it and this was where I wanted to begin, I would hit the letter I or this bracket, and then I want to use that much of it, I might hit the O. And you can see you get this highlighted area in light gray. And now when I drag, it only brings down that part. And then I could go back in and find another part, and you can see you can only highlight one section at a time. And now I'd bring down this part. So you might edit your interview that way. That's certainly fine. Some people do that for sure. One thing to notice is by clicking on the image, what I drag down is actually both a video and an audio track locked together. And you can see on the sequence, on the timeline here, that everything above this fatter line has V for video, and everything below has A for audio. And Premiere won't let you screw that up. You can't put audio on your video track, so don't worry about that. So now I've got these two little pieces, and I could edit them further, or I could rearrange them, all sorts of things. I'm going to delete them for a second. For interviews, my preference, I generally edit the interview over here on the timeline in the sequence. I just find it makes more sense to me. So I'm gonna show you that process. You can use either process, you can mix and match. And I'm gonna show you how some of these tools work, these basic editing tools. So this is my interview. I can play it and listen to it. I can use the space bar.
I don't care. I think it's definitely coming more into being a cooler thing. Like it's coming back into style, I guess. But no.
So what are the things I want to do? I might want to cut this into pieces. I might want to take sections out. I might want to rearrange things. In a way, it's not that much different than using Microsoft Word. I want to know how to cut, copy, and paste. And I'm going to do that by using various tools over here. And what's good about 95% of what we do is you only need to use a couple of these tools to start. One thing I like to be able to do is make this bigger so I can see it more clearly. So expand it out. And I can do that by zooming in. Under here, under the hand key is the zoom tool. It's just the letter Z. So if I'm clicked in this box, I can zoom. If I hold down the Option key, you can see the little symbol becomes a minus sign. You can also use the plus and minus keys on your computer. It's really helpful to learn the quick keys. So the selection tool, the letter V, will always get me back to this sort of primary tool. We're going to use the razor tool, that's the letter C, and the zoom tool. So those are the tools we're going to use. You can also make these tracks fatter so it's easier to see by just scrolling over the little line here, clicking and dragging. Lets you see that better. And if you go big enough on a video track, you get to see a little icon, a little thumbnail of it. So if I want to cut this into pieces, if I want to find the most interesting place, I'm going to play it.
But no, I don't really get any weird looks.
So I don't get any weird looks. I don't know why we'd want to use that. But if I really want to find the best place to make that cut, I want to make sure I'm cutting between words. I might come to the zoom and dive right in. And you can see where the words are. The peaks of this representation of sound is sound, and where it's flat is silence. So I'm going to want to make that cut, in between. I'm going to come to my razor tool, the letter C, and roll over, and I'm going to cut.
I don't really get any weird looks or speculation, stereotypes put on me because I do theater.
So he's talking about what it is to be an actor. That's a nice little thought. Maybe that's all I want. I'll come over here to the other side and I'll hit cut again. And then I need to remember to come back to the selection tool. I'm going to zoom out so I can kind of see what I've done by holding down the Option key and zooming. You can also use this little slider down here if you want, whatever works best for you. And you can see I've now cut this into its own section. And let's say I didn't want the beginning of this, I can just highlight it and hit the delete key. If I decided that I wanted to, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, come back to my selection tool. If I decided I wanted this to be at the end, I can just slide it by using the selection tool. So the selection tool is what we use if we want to move clips around. If for some reason we wanted to put this on a different track, we can also lift it up and put it up on another track. Command Z will undo anything that I've done, so I'm going to undo that. Right? One of the great powerful parts of using any video editor, a digital video editor, is that they're non-destructive. So I've cut this out of a much larger clip. You'll notice that I'm still in the selection tool. If I roll over the edge of it, it turns into this red kind of arrow. I can drag back out what I had sort of basically deleted, right? And I can undo that, and I can do that on the other side. So one way to adjust a clip, if you just want to take something off the end or the beginning, is to just go to the edge and click and drag it down. Click and drag it out. So those are the basic tools. We now know how to move a clip around. We know how to do what's called trimming, shorten a clip. We know that if we go to the razor tool, we can cut a clip into pieces and then go back to the selection tool and rearrange stuff. And so we could take this interview, however long it was, and really boil it down to what's most interesting and make sure that it flows well. And one of the ways we make sure that it flows well is by really zooming in when we make a cut to make sure that we're not cutting someone off in the middle of a word. We wouldn't probably want to make a cut, right in the middle of this word. We'd want to back it up and make that cut, before it in the space and leave a little bit of air. And so that's really the editing process for the interview. It's figuring out what the most interesting part is. What did they say? Do we need to rearrange it to have it make sense or to build suspense or make it more interesting? And we build out that interview process. So let's just pretend that I've done all that. And if I want to get rid of a space between clips, I can just click on it and hit the delete key. It'll get rid of the space. And let's pretend this is my finished interview. It's perfect the way it is. I've taken time to listen to it. Now I want to bring in some visuals on top of that. He's in a funny costume, but do we really want to just sit there and watch him talk? No, we want to hear him talk while we watch him do what he does. So in this case, here he is during a rehearsal, and he's practicing, and I can play it. right? So he's singing a little bit from The Wizard of Oz. He's doing this fun little spin. Let's say we want to use that. So how much do I want to use? I want him right before he starts to spin, but also where there's a perhaps the beginning of a word or a phrase. So maybe right here. In this case, I might choose to use the in. And let's say that's as much as I want of it, and I'd use the out. When I drag this out, a couple of things to notice. It brings both the audio and the video, and if I'm not careful, it's going to want to try to put it on top of what already exists. And that's a problem, right? And in fact, if I move this out of the way, you can see it wrote over it. It got rid of what was there. It basically deleted that piece of the interview. So I'm going to do Command Z, and I'm going to undo that. So you want to make sure that when you bring it in, you're bringing it in onto these empty tracks. And the easy way to do that, if I want to bring things in onto here, which is video 2, is I want to click on those tracks, and I want to bring this in onto audio 2, and unclick where I don't want it to be. And now when I bring it down, you can see that by default, it doesn't cover up over my tracks. All right, so now I've got this piece, and he's talking, and we're going to then see him doing.
Fit a character and emotion into that during the entire show.
Problem is you can't both hear him and hear the music. We'll adjust that in a little bit. But let's say we want to build out this, what's going on. We come over here, and I happen to know that there's this same scene when they're on stage, in costume. And so maybe what you might want to do is sort of match that up, right? So let's say in this case, so he's spinning. I'm going to shorten this clip right up to there. And then I'm going to find that same place here, which is about there. And I'm going to hit the in key. And then we'll let him kind of finish it. All right, and then I hit the out key. So now I'll bring that out.
During the entire show.
So kind of a nice effect, right? So that might be one way to match up the action if you had 2 shots of the same piece of action. But you can play around with that as much as you want. So what I'm doing is I'm building the visual storytelling on top of the audio interview storytelling. And you may at times come back and show us the interview and then come back to some other piece of B-roll. Right, so let's say then I wanted it to go to that. So maybe it goes from him spinning.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the way that they wrote the show is that I'm supposed to think that I'm stupid. Really interesting.
Right, so now I've started to build this video, and of course you'd add more interesting visuals. You can do all sorts of different things. The last piece of this editing process I want to show you is how do you adjust those levels. Maybe we want to hear a little bit of that music, but we still want to be able to hear the interview. So I'm going to widen out the audio down here. And you'll notice that it generates this white line. So you can change volume a couple of different ways on a clip. But I find the easiest for this kind of thing is just to go to this white line. So you just need to make sure the track's wide enough that you see it. If for some reason you don't see this white line, come up to the tools. And you want to make sure it says show audio keyframes. And you can see if I unclick that, that white line disappears. And if I bring it back, there it is. And that lets us control the volume. And you can see as I roll over that with my standard select tool, it turns black with that little kind of up and down next to it. And it says volume next to it. I can click and I can lower the volume. The volume at 0 is just whatever it was recorded at. And anything negative is quieter. If you go all the way down to negative infinity, that would be silent. That would be one way to mute the audio. And you can make things louder if you need to as well. So if I mute the audio, we just hear the interview.
I think the hardest thing is the movement.
Right, while we see him. So we're still seeing the action. We're hearing him talk. That's often going to be what you're going to want to do. Or you might want to hear just a little bit of the music. And you just play around with that.
Because as the Scarecrow, I have to transform into someone who literally has no bone.
Her voice is pretty powerful, so I might make that even a little bit quieter. I'm not sure how well you'll hear this in my recording, but...
And so it's really, I don't really get any...
Right? And so we can balance audio that way. So if you record audio that's too quiet, you can make it louder. Or if you just want it to be quieter, you can make it softer. All of those things are possible. The last thing I'll show you in terms of audio is maybe I want to hear him singing in the background, but not the whole way through because it's kind of distracting. I want to kind of fade it in or fade it out. So I'll show you one more tool. That's the pen tool. And if you click on the volume line, it sets these little dots that are called keyframes. And those are places where you can make changes. So I would come back to my select tool and I would go to these dots, and you can see I've now created a slope, and you can actually grab those dots and move them if you want. And so now this background music is going to build up, and then it's going to build out again, build quieter again.
That I'm stupid? It's really interesting because I think the hardest thing is the movement, because as the Scarecrow, I have to transform into someone who literally has no bones. And so it's really, I don't really get any weird looks or like speculation, like stereotypes put on me because I do theater.
So that's a nice way to use natural sounds in a way that gives us a sense of what it was like, but it doesn't become distracting or overbearing or that kind of thing. So these basic editing tools have shown us how to bring in content. So we've imported it. We can look at it up here in what's called the source window. And then we have different ways of dragging it down here onto the timeline. And then once it's there, we're just thinking about how do we want to cut it up and move it around. So the selection tool lets us move things. It also lets us shorten things at the end. The razor tool lets us cut things into pieces. And then we can move them around, or we can highlight something and hit the delete key. The pen tool allowed us to play around a bit with audio, fading things in and out. And the zoom tool is useful because it really lets us get a close look at things. Some of these other tools are things worth exploring as you get deeper into using Premiere, but they really are things that you can do without if you need to. So they might make things faster, but there's nothing in them that you can't do that you need them for to start with. So I would avoid them at least at the start, and then as you get more proficient, you can explore some of these other tools. And remember that Command Z lets you undo things. And this is all for Mac. The keys are slightly different on a Windows machine, but everything else looks the same. And then the last thing I would say to remember that is very important is that Command S, or under File, Save, is your friend. So as you're going along, you want to save your work because it's not really a question of if Premiere is going to crash. Premiere crashes pretty frequently. So you want to make sure you're saving so that you can get back to where you were. I get in the habit pretty regularly of just hitting Command S. You get that little save project. Premiere does have a built-in autosave, so by default every 20 minutes it will save your project, and you can change that, but I like to do it manually as well, so you have both going. And as I mentioned, if you come back to your project, so you will see that Premiere has now created this autosave feature, and so it's started building in these autosaves. So if you ever did crash your project, you could come back into this folder, find the most recent one, and at least pick up where you left off. So there you go. So there's the very basics of kind of editing. Obviously a lot more to learn, but that'll get you started. The last couple of things I wanted to show you are, first, how do we add titles? And then how do we do some basic corrections and that kind of thing. So titles are done using what's called the type tool. And then we're going to come over here ultimately to the graphics tab. So a couple of ways we might use type. We might want to, and we always would want to, identify someone in an interview with what's called a lower third. So we're going to put a piece of type here in the lower third of the frame. That's where it gets its name. Identifies the person and identifies maybe who they are. So to do that, you find the clip where you're going to put it. Let's say we're going to put it here, and we want to put it right here. We select the type tool, the letter T, and we click where we want to go. We can move this later. We get a little type box, and we're going to type in his name, and then maybe his title. In this case, he's the Scarecrow. And now we can click off of the type tool back to our selection tool, and we can move that box around. So we can put it, they don't have to be lower thirds, they usually are. We can put it right here. It's nice when you're doing an interview to leave some space, knowing that you're going to want to do that. But let's say we want to change the font or dress this up a little bit. Once we've created it, if we come over here to the graphics tab, we get this window over here. There are some built-in templates, but we want to edit this thing that we've created. So we click on the edit button, and there's 2 lines of type here. I can highlight, just one of them. And then you have some basic choices. You can pick different fonts. Oops, down here under fonts, under text. In general, I think it's better to pick fonts that don't have these little tails at the ends of letters. It's called serif fonts. We want sans serif, sans meaning not or without. Letter H will get me to Helvetica is a very common font that people use. So Helvetica regular might be one that you use. So we can pick a font. We can change the size here. You want to keep in mind your video might be watched on someone's tiny iPhone as well as on a big screen, so you want to make sure it's legible. The fill would be the text color if you wanted to try a different color, whatever it might be. And then we can do the second layer of type either all at once or different. And normally you'd use a similar font at least. So let's say Helvetica, pick light. So it's of the same family, but it feels different. And generally you'd make that second line a little smaller just to sort of give it some sense of hierarchy of what you think is most important. And again, then you can come up to the select tool and you can move this box around. And you can see over here it generated a clip for you.
Much about the show coming into it.
You can at this point move it. You can decide you really wanted the type down here at the beginning, or whatever you want. The last thing I'll show you about type, and let me zoom in on that just a little bit. If I go to my select tool, if I go to the edge of any clip, it turns red again. If I hold down the control button, and click, I get some menus. And one of them is apply default transition, and that's a simple fade. And I could put that at both ends if I wanted.
Oh, really?
So fades in. It's me coughing, and it fades out. So easy way to create a lower thirds. You would use the same technique if you were making a title for your show. A title is just another use of title. So let's say I went all the way to the beginning. I'm going to select everything. I'm just going to move it down a little bit. Let's say we wanted to start on black. And I wanted to call this something clever like The Wizard of Oz. Right? And again, I can come over here. I'm in the graphics tab. I can come to edit. I can center it. I can, make it bigger if I want. Oh, I have to highlight it. Now I can make it bigger if I want. Right, that makes it off center, so I might want to center it again. Whatever I want to do. I could add another line of type. I could add, graphics. I could change the color. Whatever I want. And now, again, it drops it in here, and I can make that as long or as short as I want. Right now, if I play...
So, nope, not really.
That's not very good, so maybe I would shorten that. Right, so The Wizard of Oz. And then it disappears and the video begins. So that's how you create titles. Titles, lower thirds, any kind of text that you want to appear in your video. You use the text tool, and then you use the graphics tab to do any kind of editing. The last two things I wanted to show you is just a little bit about how to fix things. So I showed you with audio that we can make things louder or softer and louder. You definitely might need to do that. Basically, before you finish your video, at the end, one of the things you want to do is watch and see how loud your audio is using this audio meter. You can turn the volume up and down on your computer, so if it's too soft, you'll make it louder, but you're not really changing the actual recorded levels. You want to make sure that what goes out to your audience is of a strong enough signal without being distorted. And so we generally record audio out in the field. This is a decibel scale, somewhere in this -6 to -12 range. But if we're going to put things online, our final output is usually just above -6, somewhere around -3. We don't want to ever hit 0. So what I'll do towards the end of the editing process is I'll go through every clip.
Nope, not really.
and watch where the
I don't
audio
know if it's
is.
just my friends or. And what about
Normally you'd have both channels being the same. This recorded to only one channel back in the day. So just watch the louder one.
friends or. And what about excuse me, this playing?
That's me coughing. But let's get to where he's talking, because I would edit me out, right? We would really only hear this part.
Minimally, I don't know much about the show coming into it, but I mean, I know the basics.
So the very loudest part of him was just above -6, so I might make this just a little bit louder. And then I would just play it to make sure.
I don't know much about the show coming into it, but.
So that's about where I'd want to be. And then I'd come to this clip
Character and emotion.
and do the same and maybe make it just a little bit louder. And just go through each clip and kind of get it into a nice
to that
space.
During the entire show.
Right. Obviously, if someone's whispering, it's going to be a little quieter. That's okay. But you want your general normal speaking volume to be in that -3 range, and you never want to hit 0. So if we hit 0, we're going to get distorted audio.
Yeah. It's really interesting because.
So that would be bad. If we're hitting 0, we'd need to make sure to make it quieter. There's a lot more you can do with audio. There's a lot of audio tools in the audio tab that you can get into. Fixing things. There's some filters and stuff, but that's much more advanced than what we're going to deal with right now. In terms of color and brightness on a video clip, if I come to this interview, he looks really sort of purplish, magenta, grapish, whatever you want to call it. Like the color's wrong on here, and I would want to fix that. So if I double click on the clip, I see it in both windows. I can come over here to color, and I have some really basic color controls. In this window, it's possible that there might be all closed like this, but if you click on any one of them, they open up. And I'm only going to go over the basic tools, which is really more than we need for most of what we're doing. There's a couple of ways to look at things. If you leave it this way, as I make changes, you can always compare it to the original, and that's super useful. But you may also want to come down into, up here to Lumetri or Lumetri, I don't know how you say it, scopes, which lets you look at sort of a graphic representation. So these are the 3 primary colors, red, green, blue, and you can see there's a lot more red right now, and that normally we'd want them to be a bit equal. So you can use this as a more sort of scientific measure than just trusting that your screen is calibrated properly. So if I come back over here, I always want to double click to make sure I'm working on this clip. Let's use the scopes for this. I can come over here, and with inside the basics, I basically want to work my way down. So there is this white balance selector, this little eye drop, and if there's something neutral in your frame, you can try that by clicking on something. But you can see his shirt's brown, and so you don't get very good color. But if there was a gray or a white, there's really nothing in this frame that would work on. So if that doesn't work, I would come down here to the sliders, and I would just play around, right? And you start to learn how to fix color, but you can also watch the scope. So too much red, so I'm going to move both of these away from those colors. And you can see if I go too far to the green, things look very green. So I don't know. I think that looks much more natural. Not perfect, but we'll leave it at that for now. And then if I needed to, I could come down here and adjust some of these other settings. So exposure is exactly what you think it is. These should change as you're going. If they don't, sometimes I find it useful just to click on this. For some reason, that tends to free them up. So you can see now that they're moving. And if I go too far to the bright, you can see in the picture that the side of his face is too bright. But you can also see it here that we're hitting the top of the scale and colors are getting clipped. So those sort of help us. You can decide if it's too contrasty, like that looks way too contrasty, that looks kind of flat. And you can play. Highlights would just affect the bright areas without affecting the background. So if we wanted to bring a little bit more detail back into the side of his face, and shadows is the opposite. It can lighten the deeper, darker areas, but not change the highlights as much. So I can kind of play around with that. I would say less is more. If you shot it well to begin with, you probably don't need to do much in the way of color correction. And then I'll show you just one more trick. I fixed this. Let's move this out of the way. But this was shot under the same conditions. Do I need to go through and do it all over again? What a hassle that would be. If I come to this clip and I copy it, and I come to this next clip And what I want to do is paste the attributes. So I double check that Lumetri is checked, which it is, and I hit OK. And now the two clips match. And I could do that to all the interviews. So quick and easy way to fix color. So I know I took several minutes doing that, and it might have seemed complicated, but it's a pretty basic intro to just, some quick and easy fixing of color or clips that are too dark or too bright, that kind of thing. If you're way off, if your clip is just totally too dark or too bright, you're not going to be able to fix it. There are just some things that aren't fixable. Same with sound. But if you're close, you can definitely make adjustments inside of Premiere. So I've gone over setting up your project, how to import things, how we can look at these clips, decide what we want to use, how we edit them, build title slides, fix some things that might need fixing. And that's really it for the basics of editing video. The last thing to do would be to play through it, make sure it sounds good, make sure it looks good, make sure there's no mistakes, and then export that into a video format that someone could watch. If you don't do that, they would have to own Premiere to watch your video. So we want to export that into a format that you could post to YouTube or someone could watch on their computer. So we click in the timeline. Let's assume I'm done with my masterpiece. Come up to File, Export Media, or Command M, much quicker. And you'll get this export box. Down here, you can decide whether you want to export everything on the timeline, which is normally what you'd want to do, but then you need to make sure there's nothing extra there, right? So let's say this is my finished video, and this clip I didn't want, so I had just moved it out of the way, but I forgot about it, right? What I really want is just this piece here. So if I come to File, Export Media, and if I do the entire sequence, I'm going to get that extra clip that I don't want. So either be really careful and get rid of things that you don't want, so I could just delete that, or I can set what I want to export by using that same in and out technique. So I want to go from the beginning, the letter I, and I only want to export to there, the letter O. So now this area that's in gray. So now if I go File, Export Media, Command M, and if I choose in and out, I'll only get part of what's on the timeline. If I do the entire sequence, I get all of it. So you just have some choices. So whatever works best for you. So let's say we're going to do the in and out part. So now I come up over here. You have a lot of format options. We are always going to choose H.264. It's just the most compatible for the kinds of things we'll be doing. There are a million quality settings. We are going to stick with the Vimeo 1080 Full HD setting. Again, it's pretty universal right now in terms of what people are watching. It's of good quality. It will work for all of our needs, at least for the moment. So Vimeo 1080 Full HD. And then the last thing to do would be to click on the output name and save it into that output folder so you can find it and give it a name so your teacher, your editor, your client knows who it is. So again, in this case, maybe it would just be, well, if you're a student, I would say it's your name and then, Oz or something like that, and hit save. And then just click export. And how long this takes will depend on how powerful your computer is, how fast your computer is if it's connected to an external drive, and just how big your project is. So this is a, 1 or 2 minute video, and it's taking, 30 seconds. If you did a 90-minute feature-length film, it would take hours to export. So all of that is important to know. And then the last thing you would do before turning that in, say you quit Premiere, I want to save my work. If my teacher asked for the entire project, I would just upload this whole folder. I would come into Output, I would play this, make sure it was exactly the way I wanted it to be, that there were no goofs, and then I would just upload this whole project. If your teacher only asked for the finished video, then you would just upload this outputted file. So it'll depend on the class you're taking and on what your teacher wants, but those are basically the basics. So that's a very quick, slightly disjointed Premiere tutorial. I hope it was helpful. Definitely, if you have questions, there's the handout that's linked to in the video description. There is your teacher. You can reach out to me if I'm not your teacher. There's the internet, which is a great source of information about video editing. So good luck. Be patient with yourself. It is overwhelming at first, and then usually it clicks for people and it becomes a lot more fun for everyone. So thank you for listening.